Vandermeulen, Training Coordinator for Wisconsin Facets. On behalf of our entire Wisconsin Facet staff, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is entitled Communicating in a Supportive Role. Our presenters today are Lori Albers and Deanna Link. Lori is a mom of 2 children with a variety of medical and mental health challenges. Her role supports Parent to Parent of Wisconsin and the Regional Centers for Children and Youth with Special Health Care Needs. She is a graduate of the BPDD's Partners in Policymaking, an advocate for Children's Advocacy Network, and the Survival Coalition with Family Voices. Lori has presented to Wisconsin Congenital Heart Symposium and was featured on the On Air Advocate. Deanna Link joined Children's Wisconsin in February of 2021 as the project manager under the Parent to Parent grant. She currently runs the Parent to Parent program. She has a background that includes behavior therapy, referrals and assessments, case management, and crisis response. Currently pursuing a doctorate degree in human services, Deanna continues to seek out ways to improve service provision to individuals with identified barriers to achieving health and safety. Most importantly, Deanna is a mother of 2 children that have their own healthcare needs, and so she values family voice and empowerment in the healthcare arena. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you Deanna and Lori. There you go, ladies.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Bonnie. We really appreciate it. And we are just so very excited to be here today with all of you to talk about how to communicate in a supportive role, not only as professionals, but as parents. And I don't know what everybody's background is that's joining us today, but we really want to make sure that if someone's reaching out to you and really needs some connective support, that you know how to support them the best of your ability. And we're going to give you some of those tips and tricks today to make sure that you feel very confident in being able to support others, and during this unprecedented time that you're really able to make those really good community connections with families that you might be working with. Oh, there we go. And as Bonnie already introduced, I am Lori Albers. I'm a Children and Youth with Special Health Care Needs project manager around family engagement. I work at Children's Wisconsin. I oversee 2 programs that get families very involved in the work we do in process improvement, safety, and quality at Children's. But as Bonnie mentioned, I am a mom of 2 kids with special needs. One of those stories you get to hear today, and just very excited to be here. But really do understand walking the walk, which we're going to talk about more today. Deanna.
I am Deanna Link. I am the project manager for the Parent to Parent of Wisconsin program. Most importantly to understand about me is this is the life that I live every day. And had I known that there were programs such as these in the state of Wisconsin, I think the outcomes for both of my children would have been a lot different. So it's very important to me that this gets communicated well. So please ask any questions. No question is off limits. We really want you to walk away from this informational session feeling empowered and informed and having a new way to connect should you need support or if you're aware of a family that needs that support.
Parent to Parent of Wisconsin is a proud alliance member of Parent to Parent USA. We are committed to all of the endorsed practices that Parent to Parent provides, and we didn't just haphazardly put information together to give to you. These are really tried and true best practices that are utilized in Parent to Parent programs around the nation. And in full disclosure, we will go over our funding. So Parent to Parent of Wisconsin is funded by the Wisconsin Children and Youth with Special Health Care Needs Program, Division of Public Health, Department of Health Services, through funds from Maternal Child Health Title V Services Block Grant. And yes, that's quite the mouthful. We are also funded by the Down Syndrome Association of Wisconsin. So we have a very good partnership with DSAW and Children's Wisconsin. So if you're not familiar with parent-to-parent, you might be asking yourself, well, what is it? Like, why are we here today? And why do we want to help you communicate in a really supportive role? So parent-to-parent is an intentional connection with a trained volunteer support parent who's already learned the language, found resources, and really truly somebody who has been there. Both Deanna and I bring years of experience with us to the work that we do with parent-to-parent, because we are parents who have been there, and we want to make sure that those matches that are made, in other words, somebody calls in as a referral saying that they need some help. Maybe it's a crisis, maybe it's a new diagnosis, maybe it's a connection to resources, and we want to make sure that those families get connected to whatever that need is with someone who's already on either a similar path, and really make sure that that's a very intentional connection. So the referred parent goes through an intake process and the support parent has already had training, and we marry those two together, if you will, to make sure that that's a good connection. It's not just somebody who has a child with a special healthcare need. We're going to match either on diagnosis or on a specific need regarding resources. The concept is really that a trained support parent has come to accept and understand their child's disability. Trained support parents are really the best supports and sources of information and emotional support. Doctors are really amazing at telling us what is wrong or what can happen, but a support parent is someone who's really in the trenches and lives it every day. When you go and you see your doctor or your provider or your therapist, they're working with your child for that particular time frame. That is not something they go home to day after day after day. And the chronic stress and the chronic things that come with that daily in and out of being with your child can really, really be very challenging for families. So that is why the emotional support that a trained support parent can provide is so critical to healing and to understanding. So to start, I am going to just share a story because we find that when families call or are referred to us, a lot of times they're scared. They're in a moment of crisis. They are unsure of where they need to go, and they don't even know what questions to be asking. So today my story is Scared to Supported, and it's just a little snippet of my journey, and I'm really glad to share that with you today, but you can see kind of how the process works. So Deanna, I'll let you go to the next slide. So this is my little guy. This is Matthew, who's not so little anymore. When I was 20 weeks pregnant, I went in for what they thought was going to be a routine ultrasound. And my husband and I were really excited that we were going to see the face of our little guy. And during that ultrasound, the technician got very quiet. The neonatologist came in and they delivered news that would change our life forever. They let us know that our son did not have a normal developing brain. His head was so large that at that point, I would have needed a C-section, and more than likely he would not survive birth, and more than likely I may not survive carrying him. We were told in that moment we needed to abort immediately. We were given very few options. There was no compassion and no empathy. And I felt very, very alone in that huge room with flashing lights and pictures that were devastating. It took 17 doctors, 6 hospitals in 2 states to find someone who would allow my spouse and I to continue our pregnancy and to monitor me for safety. It was very challenging and very overwhelming. And we were very, very fortunate that we were able to find care in our own backyard through Children's Wisconsin. And Matthew came into the world with a very, very big head, 2.5 pounds of water in his skull. He has congenital hydrocephalus. It was a very severe case. And we were then told in the process before having him that he would require multiple brain surgeries, one of which would be putting a shunt in his brain that would drain the extensive fluid off the brain so the brain could grow, and that would in effect collapse his skull. It's a pretty scary thing to hear. So we went through all of those things, and even though his skull collapsed, they then needed to rebuild it, and he had a craniofacial vault remodel. So they actually took out all of the pieces of bone, put them back together, and put them back. And the poor little guy had quite a few metal plates in his head to hold everything together till he could grow and they could take them out. You can imagine how terrifying that was for us to go through that, and that was a 9-month process. And when we had the craniofacial vault remodel, Matthew had some complications. He wound up developing a hematoma, or a blood clot, on his brain, which sat on his nerves, which controlled the left side of his body. He had a stroke. He was paralyzed. And that began a whole new journey. At that point, he couldn't eat. He vomited and had a chronic vomiting condition, which lasted 4 years. And it was during that time that we were going through all these transitions with different types of therapy to rebuild his abilities and the chronic vomiting, where I learned about parent to parent. I had been scared for years, and to be able to call someone and have a lifeline was just unbelievably empowering. We got connected to different services we didn't know anything about. Matthew was able to receive new therapies that we didn't know existed, and I became a much more empowered parent. In doing so, that led me to eventually work at Children's Wisconsin because I became empowered and because I wanted other families to have a voice. And without having had that lifeline, our lives and our quality of life would have very much looked different. So I'm very grateful that the organization of Parent to Parent was there. And eventually, after I had, started to feel better about our journey, I became a support parent and eventually started working in the field. And now I support families all around the US that have craniofacial issues, neurological issues, and mental health issues. And it's a pleasure to be able to give back and to heal alongside another family. And now Matthew is 12 years old. He's doing great. He's a 7th grader. I can't believe it. And in an inclusive classroom where he loves to code and loves Pokemon. So it's all good. But it took a really long time to get there. So Deanna, I'm going to pass this over to you.
Well, thank you, Lori, for sharing your story. No matter how much I hear about Matthew's journey and your journey as a mom, it always causes me to pause and be grateful that, one, you both survived, because I wouldn't have such an awesome coworker, but 2, you found a way to share your information with others. And what I would like to pose to the people that are listening is, I would be curious to know how many of the people listening thought it was challenging to listen to Lori's story. How many of you felt uncomfortable from hearing this story? Were there moments in her story that you felt like you would have been the perfect person for her to talk to be able to support her journey? Or what questions came to mind? And if you're able, you can chime in either chat or send a question to the moderator to be able to respond to those questions.
I do have one comment, and it says that everyone's personal story is oftentimes very challenging to listen to, and that it's easy to relate to when you have your own child who has disabilities.
That is very, very true. And one of the biggest challenges when listening in a supportive role is being able to sit through those moments and allowing someone else to be very vulnerable, but very transparent. And you don't always know the direction or the outcome of the story that they're going to share. So we do like to include a personal story in our trainings just so people can sit in that moment and be aware of this is what the act says when you're saying you're going to be there to hear someone unconditionally. Were there any other questions or comments about that before we go on?
Sometimes it is hard to sit and just listen and not want to comment back and sort of like save the person.
I agree with that as well. And most of us that do this as a profession, you don't walk into like human services without that heart for people. So it is difficult to not want to find a safety net, find bubble wrap to wrap them up real tight to protect them. And then if this is a loved one or a friend or coworker that's experiencing it on a personal level, you still have that heart response. It's human nature to be in community. It's human nature to care for each other. So it's very difficult to not have all the answers. But more often than not, the person isn't expecting you to have all the answers. They just want you to have the time and the capacity to hear them out. Anything
That's all
else?
I have right now. No, that's all I have right now.
Okay, then we'll keep going in the interest of time. So one of the things that comes up when listening to parents' stories or even when reflecting on your own journey with your own child is chronic stress. Chronic stress is a response to the emotional pressure that's suffered from a prolonged period of time, which an individual perceives they have little or no control. And honestly, that is almost every day as a parent of a child that has a specialized healthcare need. Like you don't get to control what therapies will and won't work. You don't get to control how your child feels. You don't get to control what schools will or won't accept them. And so you have a lot of things that are dictated for you and you have to play along. Being in that moment for a little while is one thing. To have that be your daily existence is very difficult on the mind, is very difficult on the heart. It puts pressure on relationships, but it is actually a biological response. So your endocrine system actually is impacted. It can cause changes in your brain, and it actually has been shown to impact the memory function. Things such as headaches, fatigue, depression, low self-esteem have all been documented among parents that live this life because that is the side effect of having chronic stress. Another really interesting thing that we discovered is along with chronic stress, there's a phenomenon called chronic sorrow. And what chronic sorrow is, it's the recurring intense feelings of grief in the lives of parents or caregivers with children with chronic health conditions. But it's a normal grief response, but it's associated with living with an ongoing living loss. And what it truly is that gap between what is versus what you thought should have been or would be. A lot of it has to do with making that adjustment to your current life versus what you first imagined when you discovered you were carrying a child, or what you thought when you first brought your child home, or when you see other friends or family's child make a certain milestone and you look across the room and you guys aren't quite there yet. But it's also learning to celebrate where you really are and being comfortable with that difference. And the wonderful thing is that medical care has made a lot of improvements. So children that have been identified as having any type of disability or injury or serious chronic health condition, they aren't just surviving anymore. There are ways for children to have an active and enjoyable life. And regardless of the severity of the condition, Parents still are experiencing multiple challenges and still have very unique stressors related to their child's illness. And it's been shown that 80% of those parents that have children that fall into those categories experience a chronic sorrow. It seems very prevalent when it's a chronic illness that will not show immediate changes or improvements. A lot of parents that have children that are experiencing developmental disorders, neural tube defects such as spinal bifida, sickle cell disease, epilepsy, diabetes, Down syndrome, where this is just going to be an ongoing, ever-changing moment. Those parents do experience some phenomenon of chronic sorrow. Along with that chronic sorrow is grief. And we've often been told that there are stages of grief. But Lori and I like to teach from Dr. Ken Moses, who's a parent, but he's also a psychotherapist and a psychological consultant. He considers grief to be in states. So you have grief and grieving states. And the reason he calls it states is because it's very cyclic, and you can be in any state at any moment and keep going back and forth depending on what you're experiencing in that moment. When children are chronically ill, the families enter into the grief cycle, and the cycle continues for each diagnosis, for each surgery, for each milestone not achieved. And for each obstacle, a parent creates a new dream. And those dreams are only as good as the next event that happens. So right now we could be stable and we're meeting all the benchmarks. And then our next appointment, we've got a new medication, or we have to try a new therapy. And once again, we have to process all of this. And so we go through the denial, the anxiety, the fears, the guilt, the depression, and the anger, all associated with grief. And immediately we're right back into this rabbit hole of bouncing back and forth between these different emotions, trying to make sense of our world and trying to help our child navigate that world in the process. When most people find out they're expecting a child, they develop dreams of what their child will look like, be like, sound like who we're going to have play dates with. Like that is human nature. We joke with family and friends about possible characteristics or foods or things we even hope they don't inherit from the parents. We have dreams of what we expect that child to accomplish. And no one truly expects that they're going to walk into a visit and be told that the child that is now a gift will be different from their peers, either medically or socially or developmentally. We receive those diagnoses, and those dreams, they change, and sometimes they completely vanish. And that loss of those dreams can be very painful. And one of the things that Dr. Moses comments is that as disability bluntly shatters the dreams, parents face a complicated, draining, challenging, frightening, and consuming task. They must raise the child that they have while letting go of the child that they dreamed of. They must go on with their lives, cope with the child as he or she is now, and let go of those lost dreams to be able to generate new dreams. And to me, that part is really important, because we definitely aren't saying that when you get a diagnosis, like all is lost and all hope is gone. It's just the process of figuring out what should our new dreams be? What will that look like? Like, what is our new reality? So within that grieving process, that's where those new dreams are able to be formed. And grief is very healthy because it helps you separate from the significant loss of that dream and fantasy or the projection of the future and begin to focus on what's actually in front of you. It's very healthy, it's necessary, and it's normal. The thing that you need to be aware of, though, is if you stay in one of those states for too long, it is absolutely critical to be able to reach out to professional assistance. Dr. Moses uses the term grieving states rather than the grieving stages because people experience different feelings at different times and in no specific order. Denial, which we've all heard, happens because grief is unexpected. And denial is honestly buys time to find some inner strength and some external supports. Anxiety serves to mobilize and focus energy for change. It takes great energy to face the loss and to incorporate what has happened into your life. Fear. Fears honestly are an acknowledgement of what we're gonna have to change. It's unknown. And so we have a right to express that we're scared, we're uncertain. This just doesn't feel good. Inside of fear is usually where you'll find some of that grief and depression and anger. It often showcases as fear, but those other emotions are generally hidden inside. Guilt, though often given a very negative connotation, when dealing with grief, guilt actually permits a person to rework something from the inside while answering the question why for ourselves. Depression permits re-examination of the definition of competency as a parent or competency as a caregiver, competency as a professional, because sometimes as professional, we have clients that we did not expect to go through a certain change. And it's like, am I competent enough? Can I provide the correct information? Can I provide appropriate support for this family? We redefine our capability. What are our values? What are our strengths in this moment? And in that moment of depression, it honestly helps a person view the world a little less critically because you begin to fact find, because you're a bit withdrawn and you have time to yourself to be able to do some of this thought work. And again, depression is healthy as long as it doesn't become the end point. And anger. Again, another one of those emotions that may not have the greatest reputation, but it's needed. When a family experiences the anger of a loss, it provides a sense of justice. It gives you a way to say, this isn't what I expected. This doesn't feel fair. This doesn't feel right. I wasn't prepared. Why my child? It lets it come to the surface. So you're not hiding, you're not pretending, and you get to be your authentic self in that moment. And unfortunately, anger can often be misplaced to the people that the parents need the most. So as parents, you want to be mindful of who are you projecting your anger towards, and have a really honest conversation with them later, where it's like, I appreciate that you called, but we just left therapy, or we just left the doctor and they said XYZ. As a professional, that's where that thicker skin absolutely comes into play, because they truly aren't upset at you, but you are a safe target. They know if they cuss or they scream or they cry in your office, they still get the right to come back. Like, you won't abandon them for being angry, where they aren't as sure with a coworker, or they aren't as sure about a neighbor or a family member. You are very safe. And so as professionals, you'll experience the outlash of anger very often because they assume that you can handle it and will allow them to return when it's over. So knowing all of this, and hearing just the different ways these emotions interact with each other and how heavy they can be, it can feel overwhelming. And it's like, what am I supposed to do to help someone who's grieving? And honestly, the best thing to do, the simplest and the most effective thing to do, is just listen. The grieving process proceeds when a parent experiences and shares with a significant other the feelings of grieving, along with the thoughts and issues that get stirred up by those feelings. Simply being able to get it out in a safe and supportive place helps parents move through the different states, and it allows them to feel safe about having to return to a space because they're like, oh, well, when I was angry the last time, she was there. When I was feeling depressed, he heard me out. And so when they have a resurgence of one of those states, it's not as scary. The anxiety won't be as high because they survived it, because they were heard. And we believe that's one of the greatest benefits of peer support, which is honestly what Parent to Parent of Wisconsin is based on. There are ways that being present for someone helps them in a number of other areas. One of the things that they've discovered is quality peer support improves chronic health outcomes, not only in the parent that you're supporting, but also in the child that they're supporting. Because an informed and healthy parent is able to make better decisions for their child. We see a decrease in the amount of hospitalizations, a decrease in actual loss of life, because people are making better choices. They're expressing concerns. They're asking the questions that need to be asked so that professionals can intervene when needed, so that family and friends can support as much as possible. They don't feel alone. They feel less ashamed, and they're more likely to continue services because they aren't the only one in that moment. And in addition to some of these outward benefits, we have also learned that peer support actually helps people at the cellular level, which I thought was unbelievably cool. When we think about the chronic stress and the chronic sorrow and the damage to the brain and the damage to the heart, it just seems impossible to overcome that and help people achieve true health. But what research discovered is that parents who receive and benefit from parent to parent or emotional support, not only do they stop some of that decline in telomeres, which are the ends of our cells. And if you think about, the best way to explain it is if you think about old tennis shoelaces, I know now you don't see tennis shoelaces as often, but the old tennis shoelaces right at the end, they used to have that plastic cap, and you would know when kids didn't tie their shoes because it would become frayed and then you wouldn't see that little plastic anymore. At the ends of our cells are that same way. They should have that plastic cap. Over time, chronic stress causes the end of your cells to look like a shoestring that has been stepped on and has lost that protective covering. What they've discovered is that healing happens when we support each other, and it begins to reverse that effect. So over time, your body begins to pull those ends back together and put a new plastic cap on it, which is unbelievable. Like, you're healing yourself, and that parent is also healing simply by listening and being present. Be here now. You begin to hear the secret that being fully in the moment is the greatest gift you can give in each situation. Like, we want it to be super complicated, and it's not. We want people to have tons of credentials, and you don't need it. Both Lori and I started our journey as scared, uninformed parents. There was no school that would have made it better. There was no degree that would have made it better. We were in that moment, but it took other parents that understood where we were to help pull us through and get us to the point where we're now professionals that are able to sit in these seats and train and talk and educate and listen. So please, at no moment ever think that you don't have enough experience or you don't have the right words. None of us have all the answers, but you do have access to resources that help you survive your moment, and that's what other parents need. I think we've all seen some form of the saying, you have two ears and one mouth, so we can listen twice as much as we speak. I think it's human nature to just talk. We like to hear ourselves talk. And if it's quiet, a lot of times we get uncomfortable, and so we fill that gap with more words. But the reality is, we put a lot of pressure and time and effort into teaching our children to speak. I don't recall my parents ever sitting me in the corner and trying to teach me to listen. I don't recall a elementary school, middle school, high school, any college course where they truly developed a class or dedicated time to teach me to listen. And so as humans, like we're hardwired to talk, to speak. And so we often patiently wait for a pause in the conversation so we can jump in. And so like I tell my kids all the time, like quiet is okay. After someone says something, you don't have to respond right away. It's okay to allow an awkward silence so that you can process what you heard and the other person can process the fact that they just let go of whatever it was that they shared with us. There are many different levels of listening. Sometimes you're listening to understand. Sometimes we're listening to figure out how does this apply to me, or how does this apply to the situation or the problem we're attempting to solve. More often than not, we're listening from a place of judgment. Sometimes we're listening so we can tell our own story, like, oh, that sounds familiar. As soon as they stop, I'm going to tell them about the time that happened to me. And in this day and age, when we have our computers beeping, our cell phones dinging, all these different notifications, we catch ourselves in moments of non-listening. Our bodies are physically there, but we are not being attentive at all. So good listening requires listening to what is being said with an open mind, rather than judging if that person or the content of their conversation is right or wrong. It allows you to step into another person's shoes to see how they see the world. It allows you to understand what is not being said. You'll pick up on subtle hints such as gestures, facial expressions, their posture, the tone in their voice, emotions that you see in their face. But we'll only hear these nonverbal cues if we are truly in the moment and in tune with actually listening. Listening openly to another person is a skill we so rarely get to practice that we often end up responding to a portion of what was told to us. And we never clearly get a chance to understand the story that's been shared. So it's important to know where you are and how you're listening. So if you're in that non-listening mode, you might be sitting right in front of them, but your mind isn't focused on the person that's in front of you. If you're listening to tell your story, there you're just waiting to jump in to tell your story instead of providing space to let them finish. If you're listening to judge or evaluate, you may catch yourself getting caught up in comparison. You're waiting to agree or disagree with the person talking to you. You may actually begin to get caught up in your own memory because something has been triggered by what they said. And you then have this emotional response or judgment about the story being shared with you. You could be at the application stage. How does this even apply to me? Why did they call me with this? Why did they send me this email? Or you may actually feel like you need to do something about what is being said. And so you're less likely to notice aspects of the other person's communication because you're trying to figure out what to do. How do I apply this information to my next steps? Ultimately, we should be aiming to listen to understand. By being fully present in the moment, you're then able to hear the entire message and understand the other person and can acknowledge and reiterate what was said. And that's called being an active listener. An active listener validates feelings of the speaker. So there's no judgment, there's no assumption, and there's no fixing problems. Very often in supportive roles, we think we have to be the handy person, like we have to fix it all. Ultimately, as a support person, you want to aim to work with the person, to stand beside the person, to empower the person so that whatever solution they discover is in their own voice, fits their own needs. And you're playing the backup role. And what Thomas Gordon mentions in his model of active listening is that when a person feels that he is truly accepted by another as he is, then he is free to move from there to begin to think about what he wants to change, how he wants to grow, how can he become different, how might he become more of what he's capable of being. And that power for a parent that is faced with challenges with their child is irreplaceable, because finally, by being heard and feeling accepted and free of the judgments of whether or not they're a good parent, or did they do something incorrectly during pregnancy, or was it something that they could have prevented later in their child's life that led to all of these changes, now they can begin to look at solutions and look at ways that to help this child live the most active and healthy life possible. Look at ways to preserve their own mental and physical health in the process. And it all comes from finally being heard. So to sum up some of that whole listening piece, it may be the most helpful, but the most difficult thing you will ever be asked to do. And you have to remember, it takes a lot of courage for the person to talk to you. And it's going to take a lot of patience and understanding on your part to be able to sit there and allow the entire story to be told. People can feel when you are genuine about their accepting them as a person, as a whole. And it's very, like I said, it's a very powerful helping agent. And how the person is feeling should be the focus of that conversation. So what we will do now is Lori and I will demonstrate some different models of listening. There are several ways to indicate active listening. And it's being attentive, asking open-ended questions, asking probing questions. You can request clarification, paraphrase. You have to be in tune to reflect feelings and summarizing. Not every conversation will have a moment for all 7. It's not appropriate for all, but by mixing these up when you're listening to another person, it will definitely help them to feel that you heard them. So Lori, if you are ready, you can start so that we can offer examples of the different ways to indicate listening.
Okay. Well, hello, Deanna. How are you today?
Lori, honestly, a little overwhelmed. We had 3 therapy appointments and I was 10 minutes late to the second one and we weren't seen. And that's after driving an hour and a half to get there. And I just don't even know if it's worth still seeing that provider. Like, they just never listen. It's a really long ride. It's expensive to still pay for a copay, and we weren't serviced. And then the next appointment is like 2-3 months out, and just over the whole process.
Oh my goodness, what an experience. Well, what kind of therapy did you go to today?
It was supposed to be the start of aqua therapy. We were supposed to be incorporating some water aerobics and other things to improve Nate's flexibility. So again, that's a waste. There's no one near us that offers that. So it's worth the hour and a half drive if we actually get the service. But we aren't getting the service just for being 10 minutes late.
Oh my goodness, that sounds really, really stressful. I'm sorry that you went through that. So you drove an hour and a half for an appointment, 10 minutes late, and then they wouldn't even see you? Was there anything that they could offer you that might have been different?
Well, first of all, the receptionist could have actually acknowledged that we were there, because we got there 10 minutes late, but they didn't even realize we were there for another like 15 minutes. And had she acknowledged us when we first came, maybe they would have been able to see us. But if you add the 10 minutes that we were late, plus like the 15 minutes of waiting for someone to notice we were there, now we're inching toward the half-hour mark and we were into someone else's appointment time. So it would be nice, honestly, to just be seen and to be respected as people and just not another case number or another medical file that's going to get them paid. And that's how I felt in that moment.
Wow, I can hear the disappointment that you had, and it must have been very challenging to make that long drive and already being overwhelmed by driving that long of a distance. I'm really sorry that the receptionist didn't acknowledge you when you first came in and then didn't make sure that you were connected to service or support when you finally arrived.
Thank you for that.
What is your next step?
Honestly, I have no clue. With our insurance, that's the first hurdle, is finding someone that accepts our insurance. And then the second hurdle is finding a provider. So I'm not even sure how to go about finding a new provider, but it feels like maybe we need a new provider.
Well, with the insurance issue, would it be possible for you to connect to the insurance company and see if they could recommend additional providers?
I hadn't thought about that. That actually seems pretty simple. Yeah, I guess I should let them know that we're having issues and see who they recommend. That's why I call you. You tend to have a level head. You can hear the things that I'm just not figuring out fast enough. So thank you. I'll give them a call and see what happens.
Well, great. And once you do, let me know how it goes. I'd really be interested to see what happens next, and I want to make sure that you don't have the same experience next time.
I appreciate you so much. Thanks, Lori. And as you can see, it doesn't take much to offer a person an open ear, to make sure they're feeling heard, and to open the door for them to actually hear themselves say what the actual problem is. Sometimes in a crisis, a parent will be so upset or so frustrated, they won't hear themselves say what the problem is, or the fact that, or recognize the fact that they actually own the solution. So when you're listening, just concentrate on what's being said. Answer or acknowledge when you're asked a question. Allow emotions, including crying. Many parents have to wear a brave face. They have a brave face when they're at the school. They have a brave face when they're at the doctor's appointment. They have a brave face if they're facing court decisions with the child. They have a brave face even when dealing with the child because they want the child to feel like everything's going to be okay. You may be the first space where they're finally able to cry or scream or yell or honestly just be quiet, because people are constantly asking them things, or they're constantly giving them medical history. They're constantly telling their story. And maybe they just want you to listen to them say nothing. And it's the oddest thing. I've experienced it several times. And the first time it took me off guard, but then I recognized that they just needed to be heard being quiet, to be okay not doing anything. And it's okay if they are giving you a lot of information to take notes. I encourage you to acknowledge that you're taking notes so that they understand that you aren't busy with something else, but that you wanted to make sure you got the facts correct. And always, like if it's something new or different, ask for their input, ask them questions to make sure that you're getting everything that they really want you to know in that moment. And just like there are things that you absolutely should do, there are quite a few things that you should not do, including dismissing the problem, ignoring their feelings, playing the expert, giving false hope, or raising expectations. Common phrases that parents complain about hearing the most is the tried and true cliche, you are never giving more than you can handle. When a parent is sitting there and they're in tears, they're telling you this feels like it's more than they can handle. And while you may have already identified a way out, They don't see it. So diminishing their feelings of being overwhelmed or being scared is not helpful. And the likelihood of them opening up to you after that begins to diminish. Another common error is at least statements. So I tell you, well, they're going to amputate my son's first 2 toes. At least they're going to keep his whole foot. Well, no, I expected to have a son with 2 feet and all 10 toes. Eventually, I'll get to the point where I accept the removal of those 2 toes. But to tell me at least he keeps his foot is not acknowledging the fact that that's not what I hoped for my child. When I went to the appointment, I was hoping that they would be able to save those toes. Later, we may be able to talk about the benefits of, just the 2 toes versus the whole foot. But in that moment, that is absolutely not what I want to hear from you. So we encourage you to remember to think before you speak. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And it's okay. And that's again why I say that it's those awkward pauses and some of those silences are magical because it lets you go through this little checklist in your head. You're like, okay, I know about this therapy, but is it true for their insurance? Would that help her or him in this moment? Does this offer hope without overpromising? Because maybe this therapist will only give 2 sessions and she just said she needs 10 minimum. Is it necessary? Are you about to share something that has absolutely no impact on what is happening in that moment? Will it make you feel will it make the person feel that you're disengaged or not truly listening? Is it kind? We've all experienced people that wanted to help us experience tough love and tell us to straighten up and wipe our tears and go get it. And, that's helpful sometimes. But you really need to be kind because parents face a lot of pressures that they aren't able to admit to. And if they are taking the chance to share their story with you, the least you can do is be kind in your delivery when you offer a response. Other really important things to remember is the parent's response itself. Don't take it personal. If you take it personally, it will be very difficult for you to remain in a supportive role. We spoke about some of the depression and the anger and the grief that happens for parents that are dealing with children with specialized healthcare needs. So it's very often they will say something that it will be aimed at you, but not meant for you. It could be a week's worth of frustration and you happen to be in the line of fire when it finally explodes. It's not about you. It's about the week. It's about the medication change. It's about the lack of sleep. It's about the car not working again. And we've got all these therapies, or school just started and now they gave me a new supply list and I can't find it. It's those little things that mount up and you happen to be at the end of the pile. Be comfortable with boundaries. It is extremely important to set and maintain boundaries with parents' responses. We want to always be available. The trick is finding the times that are appropriate for you and still meeting the needs of those that you have agreed to support. As much as we want to, you cannot be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You have your own life, you have your own family, and you have your own physical and mental, emotional, spiritual, financial needs that you have to attend to. If you don't maintain healthy boundaries, you will soon be calling me and we'll be finding you a support parent because things will begin to crumble because you aren't attending to the things that keep you at your best. Always provide a safe space to share. You can define what that is. For some, it may be text message. Others, it's a phone call. Very few people are comfortable at this point with the changes with COVID, still doing in person. But if you're one that's comfortable, a quick coffee or walk in the park, going down by the lakefront, just somewhere different to be able to talk. Understand that what they're saying, you may be in complete disagreement with. You don't have to agree with their perspective or even their choices. Being in a supportive role doesn't mean agreeing. It means offering perspective and just listening. And again, you may not agree and you may want to jump in and tell them morally that's wrong. Financially, that doesn't make sense. Like professionally, that's that's professional suicide. Like, why would you do that? That's going to end your career. You can't do any of those things. You just listen so that and more often than not, they'll hear themselves say it. And by the end of that conversation, they'll correct it themselves. And if they don't, and they walk away feeling like that's the direction that they want to go in, that's again where your boundaries come back in play. Can you support this person knowing that this is the direction that they're going? If not, it is appropriate to make a referral back to parent to parent. Like, can you pair them with a different parent? You may suggest they talk to a different professional. If you are the professional, you can make a referral to a different service provider, making sure that they aren't abandoned in their care needs, but you're also taking care of yourself and being where you need to be able to support others in a healthy way. And now I'll give you a break from listening to me and allow you to listen to Lori for a little while.
So I noticed that we're running up against time, so I do want to make sure that we stay on for questions, but we've given you a lot of information today, and to really boil it down quickly, Deanna and I were thinking about the 4 agreements. If you've not read the 4 agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, we highly recommend it. There are really 4 things to keep in mind when you're supporting families. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions, and always do your best. So when you're impeccable with your word, you're going to speak with integrity. You're only going to say what you mean, kind of the whole Dr. Seuss, say what you mean and mean what you say. So if you've agreed to do something, I agree, I'm going to call you back on Tuesday night at 5, and that's what you have to do. And as Deanna just mentioned, if you're using the think method, you're going to say things that are true and with kindness. Don't take anything personally. Deanna already went over that, because nothing that others do is because of you. And what others are doing is a projection of their own reality. Don't make assumptions. Find courage, ask questions, ask open-ended questions, get people talking and making sure that you are reiterating what you're hearing so you have good, clean communication, and that you're not assuming they mean something, because that's where things can really get murky and difficult. And always do your best. You may not always be able to bring your best forward, but if you always go in the direction of being at your best and doing your best, no matter what the circumstance, you're going to avoid feeling bad about what you say, and you are going to be able to serve them to the best of your ability, and they're going to feel that from you. Children live happier, healthier, safer, more productive lives when their parents are strengthened, educated, and supported. As we mentioned, the great thing about being a support for others is that you're helping them heal. When you can help a parent heal, it becomes generational. The parent heals, the parent feels empowered, the parent is able to model better behaviors for their child becomes empowered, children become better self-advocates, not only being able to say what they need and what they want, but they're able to then follow in their family's footsteps by really being stronger and healthier. And that becomes a whole thing. When the parent is empowered, the child becomes empowered, the whole family becomes empowered, and everybody becomes healthier. So as we've mentioned, connecting to support, matches are made upon diagnosis, upcoming surgeries or treatments or transitions. The process that we're going to go over quickly is that you can submit, if you know of a family that could really use some support, submit to us from an online form at our website, p2p.org, to receive a match. That referred parent will have somebody from parent to parent, either Deanna or myself, reach out, connect with them, find out what their needs are, and then make that match, that one-on-one peer support match. And usually that happens within a few days. And here is the website, www.p2pwi.org. Underneath that, when you go to the website, on the right side of the screen, you'll see a little tab that says Get Connected. If you hit Get Connected, you can either refer a family for training who may want to become a support parent, or you can have us, you can put in that referral. And if you're a professional and you really want to know if somebody's closed the loop on that particular individual, you can let us know that you want us to follow up with you. And that's all on the Connect page. It's only 5 questions, so we're not asking for a whole family history. We just want to get that person's name, phone number, email, the best time to connect with them, so we can make those calls and make sure that they are matched to somebody to meet their needs. So in closing, we are just so grateful to have been with you today. Sorry, I wrapped that up really quick, but once again, Lori Albers and Deanna Link, we are here for you. We'd be happy to address any questions that you might have. So if you need us to stay on, we can do that. And we thank you for your time and attention today. It was a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you very much, Deanna and Lori. We greatly appreciate it. We don't have any other questions, but what I'd like to ask is if it would be permissible for the people who are in attendance, if they do have further questions, to contact you either by email or the telephone numbers that are on the screen. Would that be acceptable to both of you?
Oh,
Absolutely.
yes, definitely.
Okay, great. Well, thank
we encourage
you.
questions, and we encourage questions, and we encourage families and providers to reach out. Even though we are here for referred families, we do have providers that reach out to us as well, like, how do I connect families, or what can we do differently? And we're absolutely happy to answer those questions.
Well, thank you very much, the both of you. It was an extremely informative presentation today, and I'm sure that all of those who participated feel the same as I do. So thank you again. This will conclude our webinar for today. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Please be reminded that Wisconsin Facets has over 100 scheduled trainings and webinars, and we're in the process of planning our webinars for the year 2022 as well. Please check our website calendar and register for any of the upcoming trainings that may be of interest to you. And please watch for the short evaluation that will be coming your way after today's live presentation. Thank you all. Thank you, Deanna and Lori, and everybody have a great day. Stay safe and be healthy. Bye-bye.